All right, so what I was hoping to do was to just kind of explain what to do as your first step for your next stage in your connections report. Apologies for the nose and the throat sort of sound. I'm a little bit unwell, not COVID, just a head cold. So ideally, you have done this in a booklet, and hopefully you've got that booklet with you. If not, it's on OneNote, and it's a pretty straightforward grid. So most of you have your text by now, or you had to, and you were deciding on them. You really need to decide on them. You need to have a clear four texts in mind. You might find as you go on they change, and you can see that you need to find a more suitable text. But ideally, you've got all four texts in mind at this stage. What you want to make sure that you've done is they've got a time period and that you can connect them. You can kind of determine that time period. If you found that there's a couple of texts that maybe fit more with like the 1995 or 1990s and then 2000s, you can just stretch out that time period, but it's important to acknowledge that and how that influences. So if you're connecting a text from the 1990s and a text from 2015, for example, that you can kind of see the connection or the development in an idea across that time period. But most of you have pretty solid time periods that are post 2000 or set in a certain time period in the text. Anyway, from there, what you need to do was look at main ideas or themes or concepts. So this is to get you thinking about what commonalities you can find across your text. They might be expressed in different ways, and in fact, that's better if you can find the same idea expressed differently. But that's what you're wanting to do. So if you haven't done that, that is your first step. It's really important to do. And once you've done that, I'll talk you through now in my other exciting Word doc what your next stage is. So once you've got your time period, I would call that, like, the easiest way I can think of it is your umbrella connection. So all four texts that you have that time period. The reason the time period's good is you can look at how the time period of writing has influenced the ideas in it, the characters in it, the technology that it's used to produce that text, for example, films, sound effects, special effects, that sort of thing, CGI, etc. But it also works really well to reflect modern or historical, political, or history-based issues in your text. So the time period's really good, and look at how that influences text. It produces some really good opportunities for high-level discussion. So that is really positive. So that is what I've listed here as your umbrella connections that like links all your text. From there, what you need to do is have your sub-connections. Ideally, you have two of these. These just find a way of linking your text together, producing discussions on that connection, how you see it in your text, how the evidence shows it, what the ideas are, what you think of it, what the purpose is, and then ultimately factoring in your time period with them. So how is the modern setting influence that theme? And then how is that shown in a different text? Or themes are easy because you're used to them. But from there are other things that you might wish to consider. So, for example, you've got time period that's the same when the texts are produced, but one's set in India and one's set in America. And looking at how the post 2000 portrayal of settings is, and what that has, what influence that has, and so forth. To much the same extent, you can do characters, relationships, style of writing is quite good for poetry. You'll find that some of the texts that I've put in that booklet, if you're doing post 2000s, have a more contemporary or interesting approach to style. So that's really handy. Mood, tone, language, techniques, that sort of thing, you can connect. So it's up to you to figure out those connections. And that is where that one there is really handy. So if you've done that, that'll help you see commonalities or trends or threads. So if you've done that and you can see that all four of your texts have the same trend, so this is one option. You may find that you have chosen a time period, and as such you have chosen all war-based texts. Or you have a time period and you can see that they're all set in the future, or all focus on relationships, or all reveal racism. I know there's a couple of you doing that. Or technology. I know a couple of you have got that. So all four texts have that same trend through all four of them. Then if you're doing it that and you found that they've all got a same trend, so they've all got a very similar setting, whatever, then this is one option. If they haven't, don't worry, that's the next option. But some of you will find that you've got all four texts centered around technology. Then what you want to do is look at the different portrayals of that common trend. so that you can have sub-connections about that portrayal. So, for example, if you've chosen text around racism, you will find that hopefully two of your texts maybe look at a dystopian exploration, so the worst case scenario, the Get Out kind of ones. You might find that within those texts you can see that yes, they're all about racism, but like two of those texts are really focused on the impact of racism on people, or the influence of the environment on racism. Or you might find that yes, they all show racism, but this one or these two texts have a really big focus on the people who are racist and how they act, or that sort of thing. So, what you want to do is find the commonalities and differences between how that trend of racism, all four texts are post 2000s, all four texts show racism, but within that, I can see these sort of layers. If you're doing technology, you might want to look at how maybe two texts show a positive view of technology and two texts show a negative view, or perhaps that two of them are about social media based technology and two of them are about kind of warnings around technology. You'll find those commonalities and trends, and that's up to you to do. So that's an option. If you found that all four of your texts actually have a really consistent trend across them, then that's what you can do. However, most of you will probably find that you've got different sort of trends. So if you look in the booklet that I've given you, if you're using that, you'll find that there are some on environment, some on relationships, some on racism. I've kind of got various trends within there. There's multiple different ones. So if you've chosen from there, you may find that you've got two texts that connect, but two texts that don't match those other two, and that's totally fine. So then what you're going to do is look for what is connected. So you might find, for example, that you've got two texts that link around themes about relationships and two that link with technology. And that's okay. Ultimately, all four of them are connected through time period, but you'll notice that, yeah, there are interesting thoughts around relationships. And two of them are interesting thoughts around technology. So ultimately, you're saying that post 2000s texts, you can see within them that some of them explore relationships and some of them explore technology. Look at how that time period influences that portrayal. You might find that they link with racism, they might have a contemporary style, they might have strong female characters, or they just might have a focal female protagonist or a focal male protagonist. And you might see that that looks different in different texts. So if you did We Need to Talk About Kevin, you might look at his portrayal of masculinity versus the portrayal of a male character in Cat Person, or any of the poems that you've got. You might see that the text have focuses on young characters, old characters, whatever. So there is characters, children at the forefront of the text, set in America, set wherever. So you might find that you've got that, and that's okay. So you can have two texts and two texts and kind of keep them a little bit separate. They're connected because all four of them are connected by a time period, but within that, there's two and two that connect quite well. What you might also find from your planning is that yes, they break into like a two and a two, but you can see trends perhaps across these first two texts and these ones. And you can connect texts together as well, and talk about them. Ideally, you want to split it into two texts and two texts, if that makes sense. So you've got to have four texts. Um, it's tidier. It's easier to talk about how they connect that way. But also within these ones that do connect, like these ones, you can compare and contrast how they are connected. And that just is really easy. So, for example, if you were doing these ones here, so you might do We Need to Talk About Kevin and That Cat Person text short story from the beginning of the year. So if you are doing those, you might think that it's interesting to discuss that this one shows the relationships this way, this one shows the relationships this way, and then say it's interesting to look at how even though one's a platonic, or sorry, romantic relationship and one's a familial or mother and son relationship, this is something I've noticed that's similar, or here's what I can learn from this different portrayal of relationships. So yeah, by having two and two, you can compare the text as well, which is really handy, and you can look at how the time period impacts that and whether one of them was produced in 2018, but one of them was produced at the beginning of 2000 and how that changes. Ones around technology are really handy to compare, particularly if you've got one that was produced in early 2000s and one that's produced in late 2000s, because obviously technology has changed a lot in that time. So I know that's a lot of me talking with my kind of nasal voice, um, but basically, you want to find the way that your texts work together. They're going next to each other. You want to find how your texts connect Are they all four of them have a similar trend? Okay. From there, what can you see that's different or similar? Or linking to text. I hopefully haven't made that more confusing. If it is, then just feel free to email me or chat me or whatever to make this make more sense. But basically, you want to find connections within your text. It's easiest to do that by having two texts connect together out of your four connections. Lots of connections, many connections. All right, have fun connecting. Go fish.